The divorce papers hit the kitchen table at exactly 8:17 in the morning. He looked at her with cold eyes and said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his miserable life. You are a parasite. You contribute nothing. You will never amount to anything. She stood there in her old sweatshirt, 8 weeks pregnant, with a secret she never got to share, watching the man she had loved for 7 years walk out the door. He thought he was throwing away a burden. He had no idea that in exactly 43 minutes, she would be signing an $800 million deal. He had no idea that she had built an empire in secret while he mocked her dreams. And he had absolutely no idea that his cruelty had just lit a fuse that would destroy everything he held dear. This is the story of a woman who was told she was worthless on the same morning she became one of the wealthiest people in America. But here is where it gets interesting. She was arrested before she could leave the building, because he was not finished destroying her. Not yet. Stay with me until the end, because the revenge she takes is unlike anything you have ever heard. The first light of dawn crept through the water-stained windows of the cramped one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn Heights, painting pale shadows across second-hand furniture and towers of scientific journals that threatened to topple at any moment. The refrigerator hummed too loud in the corner, a persistent mechanical heartbeat that had become the soundtrack to countless sleepless nights. Serena Mitchell stood in the tiny bathroom, her fingers gripping the edge of the porcelain sink so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. Dark circles under her eyes from years of 4-hour sleep nights. Hair that needed a professional cut but had been trimmed with kitchen scissors for the past 3 years. A face that had aged beyond its 32 years from stress and sacrifice, and the constant grinding weight of being told she was not enough. But today, something was different. Today, her eyes were bright with an excitement she had not felt in years. She had been awake since 4 in the morning, too wired to sleep, too anxious to eat, too overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was about to happen to do anything except stand in this bathroom and try to convince herself that it was real. Today was May 14th, her graduation day. After 6 brutal years of doctoral work at Columbia University, she would finally walk across that stage and receive her PhD in biochemistry. 6 years of ramen noodles for dinner. 6 years of wearing the same 3 outfits in rotation because she could not afford new clothes. 6 years of listening to her husband complain that she was never available, never present, never enough of a wife because she was always studying, always researching, always chasing a dream he considered worthless. But the graduation ceremony was not even the main event. Hidden in the locked drawer of her desk, underneath a stack of research papers and old electricity bills, was a burner phone, a cheap prepaid device that she had purchased with cash at a convenience store in Queens, far enough from her neighborhood that no one would recognize her. On that phone was a single contact, saved simply as DC. David Cohen, Esquire, one of the most feared corporate attorneys in Manhattan. At exactly 11 o'clock this morning, while her classmates were posing for photographs with their proud families and making plans for celebratory brunches, Serena would be sitting in a boardroom on the 65th floor of 30 Rockefeller Plaza. She would be surrounded by some of the most powerful executives in the pharmaceutical industry. And she would be signing an $800 million acquisition deal. Vance Biosynth. That was the name of the company she had built in secret over the past 3 years, while her husband thought she was wasting time playing with test tubes in a basement laboratory. A stealth startup that operated in the shadows, funded by angel investors who had signed ironclad non-disclosure agreements, staffed by researchers who communicated only through encrypted channels. A company that was about to make Serena Mitchell one of the wealthiest self-made women in America. She touched her stomach gently, feeling the soft curve that was not yet visible beneath her oversized sweatshirt. There was a third secret she had been keeping, one that made her heart race every time she thought about it. 8 weeks pregnant. She had discovered it 2 weeks ago, alone in this same tiny bathroom, staring at the positive test with a mixture of terror and joy. She had not told anyone. Not her parents, who would have immediately started planning baby showers and knitting booties. Not her research partner, who would have worried about the impact on their work. And certainly not her husband, who would have found there some way to make it about himself, to twist this miracle into another burden that she was placing on his shoulders. She had been waiting for the perfect moment, Tonight, after the deal closed, after she could finally reveal the empire she had built in secret, she would surprise Mark with the pregnancy announcement at their 7th anniversary dinner. She had already made reservations at the restaurant where they had their first date, back when he still looked at her like she was something special instead of something broken. 3 secrets, 3 revelations, 1 perfect day. Serena whispered to her reflection in the mirror. Today, everything changes. She had no idea how catastrophically right she was. She emerged from the bathroom wearing her old Columbia sweatshirt, the navy blue one with the frayed cuffs and the coffee stain on the left sleeve that had never quite come out no matter how many times she washed it. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, the way she always wore it when she was too busy or too tired to care about appearances. She looked like what she had pretended to be for 7 years of marriage: a struggling student, a woman without ambition or prospects, a wife who needed her successful husband to carry her through life. The performance was almost over. Mark Sterling was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in. He was 38 years old, 6 years her senior, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his own worth for a single moment of his privileged existence. Square jaw that he maintained with expensive grooming products, gym-maintained body that he sculpted 3 times a week with a personal trainer who cost more than Serena's monthly food budget, hairstyled with $40 pomade that he ordered from a specialty shop in Soho. He was wearing his navy bespoke suit, the one she privately thought of as his executioner outfit. It was the suit he wore when he had to fire someone at his marketing firm, the suit he wore when he wanted to project power and control, the suit he wore when he was about to deliver bad news. Something cold settled in the pit of Serena's stomach. Mark was checking his phone obsessively, his thumbs moving across the screen with practiced speed. She caught a glimpse of the messaging app, saw the contact name at the top of the conversation, just a single letter J, followed by a red heart emoji. Her heart clenched, but she pushed the feeling down into the same place where she stored all the other hurts and disappointments of her marriage. She had been pushing feelings down for years. One more day would not matter. After tonight, after everything was revealed, she would finally have the leverage to deal with whatever was happening with Jay and the red heart emoji. Mark looked up as she entered the kitchen. His expression was strange, distant, clinical, like he was looking at a piece of furniture he had decided to throw away rather than a woman he had shared a bed with for 7 years. "You are not wearing that to the ceremony, are you?" His voice was flat, devoid of the affectionate teasing that had characterized their early years together. Serena shook her head, moving toward the coffee machine. "I will change at the venue. I have my dress packed in a garment bag." She reached for a mug, but something on the kitchen table caught her eye and stopped her cold. A manila envelope. Her name was printed on it in neat black letters. Serena Mitchell, not Serena Sterling, the name she had taken when they married. Her maiden name, as if he was already mentally separating her from his family, his life, his future. "What is that?" she asked, though some part of her already knew. Some part of her had known for months, maybe years, that this moment was coming. Mark did not answer immediately. He took a long, deliberate sip of his coffee, drinking from the mug she had bought him for their 3rd anniversary. The one that said "World's Best Husband" on the side in cheerful red letters. He set it down with a soft click against the table, centering it precisely on its coaster. "Sit down, Serena." 4 words. 4 simple words that rearranged the entire architecture of her life. Something in his voice made her blood run cold. It was too calm, too rehearsed, too practiced. She had heard him use that voice on phone calls with difficult clients, with employees he was about to terminate, with vendors he was about to cut loose, the voice of a man who had already made a decision and was simply going through the motions of communicating it. She did not sit. She stood frozen by the counter, her hands still reaching toward the coffee machine, watching as her husband of 7 years slid the manila envelope across the table with one finger. He pushed it like he was pushing away something distasteful, something contaminated, something that had outlived its usefulness. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Serena stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the cruel smile that would signal this was one of his jokes, the kind he made at her expense when he'd had too much to drink at dinner parties, waiting for him to laugh and say he was just testing her reaction. He did not laugh. He did not smile. He just sat there, watching her with those cold blue eyes, waiting for her to absorb the blow. Mark continued, his voice measured and deliberate, each word clearly chosen in advance. I have been patient, Serena. 7 years of patience. 7 years of paying for your education while you play scientist in a basement laboratory. 7 years of carrying you financially while you contribute nothing to this household. Serena felt like she was watching this scene from outside her own body, floating somewhere near the ceiling, observing a stranger receive news that would shatter her world. Mark, what are you talking about? We agreed that I would focus on my research while you... He held up a hand, cutting her off. We agreed to a lot of things. We agreed that your PhD would take 4 years, not 6. We agreed that you would start earning money once you graduated. We agreed that we would start a family by the time you were 30. His voice hardened. You are 32 years old, Serena. You have broken every promise you ever made to me. That is not fair. The words came out weaker than she intended. The research took longer than expected. The funding fell through twice. You know how difficult. I know that I have been supporting you for 7 years while you chase a dream that will never pay off. Mark stood up, adjusting his suit jacket with precise, practiced movements. I know that I come home every night to a wife who smells like chemicals and talks about enzymes like anyone in the real world actually cares. I know that I have sacrificed my own happiness, my own desires, my own needs, so that you could play pretend scientist in a university basement. He checked his Rolex, the platinum one she had bought him with her research stipend 3 years ago, after he had complained for months about wanting an upgrade from his old stainless steel model. She had eaten nothing but rice and beans for 2 months to afford that watch. I am tired of being your ATM machine, Serena. I am tired of explaining to my colleagues why my wife does not have a real job. I am tired of watching my friends' wives contribute to their households while mine drains resources like a parasite. The word hit her like a physical blow. Parasite. I need a partner who lives in the real world, Mark continued, oblivious to or uncaring about the damage his words were inflicting. Someone who understands ambition. Someone who makes real money. Someone who can stand next to me at company events without embarrassing me. He paused, and something that might have been satisfaction flickered across his face. I have met someone, he said. Her name is Jessica. She is a vice president at my firm. She is everything you are not. Successful, sophisticated, driven. And she does not need me to support her like a charity case. Jessica, the J with the red heart emoji. Serena felt the room tilt around her, the walls bending at impossible angles, the floor shifting beneath her feet. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, pressing against the secret growing inside her. Mark. Wait, her voice was barely a whisper. There is something I need to tell you, something important. He held up his hand again, palm out, the universal gesture of dismissal. Save it. I do not want to hear another pitch about your groundbreaking research that is going to change the world someday. I do not want to hear another excuse about why you need just one more year, just one more grant, just one more chance. He picked up his briefcase from beside the table. I have already moved my things to Jessica's apartment. We have been together for 6 months, if you want to know. My mother is coming by later today to help me change the locks on this apartment. The lease is in my name, after all. You have until the end of the month to find somewhere else to live. He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. He looked back at her, and for just a moment, something that might have been pity crossed his features. Sign the papers, Serena. I am being more than fair. You keep your student loans. I keep my assets. No messy court battle, no dragging each other through the mud, just a clean break. He opened the door. Do yourself a favor, get a job as a laboratory technician somewhere. Maybe teach high school chemistry if you can pass the certification tests. Stop dreaming about things that are never going to happen. You are 32 years old. It is time to accept who you actually are. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a gunshot. Serena stood frozen in the kitchen, the manila envelope in her hand, the pregnancy announcement burning unspoken in her chest, her entire world reduced to ashes in the span of 5 minutes. She looked at the clock on the wall. The one she had bought at a thrift store when they first moved into this apartment, back when she still believed that their life together was just beginning. 8:17 in the morning. She had exactly 43 minutes until she was supposed to sign an $800 million deal that would change everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the special phone, the one that connected her to her secret life. She pulled it out with trembling hands and read the message from David Cohen. Board is assembled. Julian Thorne flew in personally from London. Car is waiting downstairs. Do not be late. Serena looked at the divorce papers in her hand, the neat black letters of her maiden name, the clinical language of legal dissolution. She looked at her phone, the message from David, the deal waiting for her across the river in Manhattan. She looked at the door through which her husband had just walked, believing with absolute certainty that he had discarded a worthless burden. A parasite, a woman with no ambition who would never amount to anything. Something shifted inside her. The shock began to crystallize into something harder, something colder, something dangerous. She walked into the bedroom with deliberate steps and opened the back of her closet. Hidden behind her modest cardigans and thrift store sweaters and the faded dresses she wore to please a man who was never pleased, was a garment bag from Bergdorf Goodman. She had purchased it 3 months ago with the advance payment from Chimera Global's letter of intent. $20,000 wired to an account that Mark knew nothing about, spent on a custom-tailored charcoal Tom Ford power suit that fit her like armor. Beside it hung a cream silk blouse that cost more than her monthly rent. On the floor of the closet sat a pair of Christian Louboutin heels, the red sole still pristine, waiting for this exact moment. Serena shed her Columbia sweatshirt like she was shedding a skin. She stepped out of her worn pajama pants in the old t-shirt she slept in. She stood naked in front of the full-length mirror, looking at the body that her husband had never appreciated, the body that had carried her through 6 years of doctoral work on 4 hours of sleep a night, the body that was now growing a new life that would never know its biological father's cruelty. She dressed slowly, deliberately, watching herself transform in the mirror. The silk blouse slid over her skin like cool water. The Tom Ford blazer hugged her shoulders with precision tailoring. The pants fell in a perfect line to the floor. The Louboutin heels added 4 inches to her height and something immeasurable to her confidence. As she buttoned the blazer and adjusted the collar, the struggling student wife disappeared completely. In her place stood Dr. Serena Mitchell, CEO and founder of Vance Biosynth, creator of a revolutionary enzyme that would transform the pharmaceutical industry. A woman who was about to become one of the wealthiest people in New York City. She applied lipstick with a steady hand, a bold red that she had never worn during her marriage because Mark said it made her look cheap. She liked how it looked now, like war paint. She grabbed the manila envelope from the kitchen counter. She did not sign the divorce papers. Instead, she pulled a sticky note from the pad by the phone and wrote 3 words in her neat, precise handwriting. See you in court. She stuck the note to the envelope and left it exactly where Mark had placed it. Let his mother find it when she came to change the locks. Then Serena Mitchell walked out of the apartment that had been her prison for 7 years, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a countdown to detonation, and descended to the car that was waiting to carry her into her new life. Mark Sterling had woken up that morning believing he was about to discard a burden. He had no idea that he was actually throwing away a diamond just before it was polished. He had no idea that the woman he called worthless was 43 minutes away from becoming worth more than he could comprehend. He had no idea that his cruelty had just lit a fuse that would eventually destroy everything he held dear. But he would learn. They would all learn. The black sedan moved through Manhattan traffic with the practiced efficiency of a driver who knew every shortcut, every timing of every traffic light, every back alley that could shave 30 seconds off a journey. Serena sat in the back seat, her hands folded in her lap, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. She had made this journey 100 times in her mind, rehearsing what she would say, how she would present herself, what she would do if the negotiations took an unexpected turn. But she had never imagined making it on the same morning her husband served her divorce papers. Her hands were trembling slightly. She pressed them together harder, willing them to be still. She could fall apart later. She could process the betrayal and the heartbreak and the 7 years of wasted love later. Right now, she had exactly 31 minutes to close the biggest deal of her life. Her phone buzzed. The regular phone, not the burner. A text from her mother. "We are at the auditorium. Where are you? The ceremony starts in 2 hours. Your father is so excited he has already cried twice." Serena stared at the message for a long moment. Her parents had flown in from Ohio 2 days ago, using frequent flyer miles they had been saving for years. They were staying at a modest hotel in Queens because Manhattan prices were beyond their retirement budget. Her father had bought a new suit for the occasion, the first new suit he had owned in a decade. She typed back quickly. Something came up at the lab. Emergency. We'll explain later. Save me a seat. It was not entirely a lie. There was an emergency, just not the kind her mother would understand. She put the phone away and closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. In through the nose, hold for 4 counts, out through the mouth. The meditation technique she had learned during the worst months of her doctoral program, when she was running on caffeine and desperation and the stubborn refusal to let Mark be right about her. The car pulled up to 30 Rockefeller Plaza at exactly 10:53. Serena stepped out onto the sidewalk, her Louboutin heels clicking against concrete that had been walked by some of the most powerful people in the world. She straightened her blazer, checked her reflection in the glass doors, and allowed herself one moment of pure, terrified exhilaration. This was it. This was the moment she had been working toward for 3 years. This was the moment that would change everything. The lobby of 30 Rockefeller Plaza was a cathedral of commerce, all marble floors and soaring ceilings, and the quiet hum of money being made. Security guards in crisp uniforms nodded as she passed, having been informed of her arrival in advance. A woman in a designer suit approached with a practiced smile. "Dr. Mitchell, I am Patricia, Mr. Thorne's executive assistant. Please follow me." They walked past banks of elevators, past reception desks staffed by beautiful people with perfect posture, past art installations that probably cost more than Serena's apartment building. Everything was designed to intimidate, to remind visitors that they were entering a realm of power far beyond their ordinary lives. Serena refused to be intimidated. She had not come this far to be scared off by expensive furniture. The elevator rose 65 floors in smooth silence. When the doors opened, Serena stepped into a reception area that was larger than her entire apartment. Italian marble floors veined with gold, abstract sculptures that looked dangerously expensive, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of Manhattan that made the city look like a toy. A heavy silence hung over everything, the kind of silence that only money could buy. "Dr. Mitchell." Patricia gestured toward a set of frosted glass doors at the far end of the room. "The board is assembled. They are expecting you." Waiting outside the doors was David Cohen. David was in his late 50s, a former federal prosecutor who had spent 15 years putting away some of the biggest financial criminals in American history before transitioning to corporate law. He was known in legal circles as the Pit Bull, a nickname he had earned by never letting go once he sank his teeth into a case. He was also one of the few people in the world who knew the full scope of what Serena had built. He looked her up and down, noting the Tom Ford suit, the Louboutin heels, the red lipstick. A small smile crossed his weathered face. "You look ready for war." "I am." Serena's voice was steady despite the chaos churning inside her. "What should I expect in there?" David's expression grew serious. "Julian Thorne is inside. He flew in from London specifically for this meeting. He does not do that for anyone. What do you know about him?" David paused, choosing his words carefully. "He is brilliant, ruthless. He built Chimera Global from a struggling regional pharmaceutical company into a $50 billion conglomerate in less than 15 years. He has a reputation for testing people, finding weaknesses, exploiting them. And if I pass his test, then you walk out of here with $400 million in cash and the resources to change the world." David put his hand on the door. "One more thing. Thorne does not respect people who try to impress him. He respects people who challenge him. Do not back down in there, no matter how hard he pushes." Serena nodded once. "I have been backing down for 7 years. I am done." David pushed open the frosted glass doors. The boardroom was a temple of corporate power. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides offered a 360-degree view of Manhattan. Central Park stretched to the north like a green carpet laid out for royalty. The Hudson River glittered to the west. The city sprawled in every direction, 20 million people going about their lives, completely unaware of the deal that was about to be struck 65 stories above their heads. The conference table was a single slab of ancient kauri wood, salvaged from a New Zealand swamp where it had been preserved for 50,000 years. The chairs were handcrafted Italian leather. The technology was invisible, embedded seamlessly into the wooden walls, available at a touch but never intrusive. 14 executives sat around the table, 12 men, 2 women, all of them watching Serena with the predatory interest of sharks who had detected blood in the water. They were the elite of the pharmaceutical industry: chief financial officers, chief operating officers, vice presidents of various divisions, board members who controlled billions of dollars in assets. Each of them had reviewed Serena's work, analyzed her patents, assessed her potential value to their organization, and each of them had doubts. She could see it in their eyes, the skepticism, the condescension. They saw a young woman with no corporate experience, no track record of commercial success, no proof that she could translate laboratory brilliance into market dominance. They were about to learn how wrong they were. At the head of the table sat Julian Thorne. He was 44 years old, according to the research Serena had done. Dark hair that was starting to show threads of silver at the temples, a sign of the stress that came with running a $50 billion empire. Eyes the color of a frozen lake in winter, pale blue and utterly cold. A face that belonged on ancient coins, all sharp angles and classical proportions. He was not handsome in the conventional sense. His features were too severe, his expression too guarded. But there was something magnetic about him, something that drew the eye and held it, a stillness that made powerful men nervous, a presence that filled the room without demanding attention. He did not stand when Serena entered. He did not smile. He did not offer any of the social niceties that normally grease the wheels of corporate interaction. He just watched. Dr. Mitchell. His voice was a low baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floor. You are 3 minutes late. It was a power move. Serena knew it because she had done her research on Julian Thorne. He did this to everyone, found small ways to put them on the defensive before negotiations even began. Some people apologized profusely. Some people made excuses. Some people crumbled entirely. Serena walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, deliberately ignoring the seat that had been placed next to Thorne for her. She set her briefcase on the polished wood with a decisive sound and looked directly into those cold blue eyes. I apologize for the delay, Mr. Thorne. I had to end a bad investment this morning. A flicker of something crossed his face. Interest, perhaps, or amusement. The other executives exchanged glances, uncertain how to interpret this unknown woman who spoke to their CEO as an equal rather than a supplicant. Julian leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. My analysts spent 72 hours attempting to find a flaw in your enzyme patent. They failed. Your Vance protocol actually works. It eliminates polyethylene terephthalate from the human bloodstream at a rate of 94% within 36 hours. Serena allowed herself a small smile. 96.3%. I ran a final optimization sequence last night. The updated data should be in the supplementary materials I sent this morning. Around the table, lawyers shuffled papers. Someone pulled up data on a tablet. Julian's eyebrow rose almost imperceptibly. You improved a revolutionary process by 2.3 percentage points overnight. I had some free time. The room went silent. No one spoke to Julian Thorne with that kind of casual confidence. No one treated negotiations with Chimera Global as an afterthought. Julian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Impressive laboratory results, Dr. Mitchell. But laboratory results do not automatically translate to market dominance. Science is one thing, business is another. Why should I trust a newly minted PhD with zero corporate experience to oversee a research division worth almost $1 billion? This was the test. David had warned her about this moment. Julian Thorne always found the weakness, always probed the doubt, always pushed until something broke. Most people tried to defend themselves, listing credentials and qualifications and letters of recommendation. Serena did something different. She leaned forward, matching his intensity across 20 feet of ancient wood, and let him see exactly who she was. Because I built this company in secret while managing a household for a man who thought my life's work was a cute hobby. I created a $1 billion breakthrough with zero resources, zero support and zero recognition. Every obstacle you can imagine, Mr. Thorne, I have already overcome it while simultaneously being told I was worthless. She paused, letting the words settle into the silence. You are not buying my corporate experience. You are buying my hunger. You are buying 3 years of sleepless nights and failed experiments in moments of despair that would have broken anyone who was not absolutely certain of what they were building. You are buying the mind that solved a problem your own researchers have been failing to crack for a decade. She held his gaze without flinching. And right now, Mr. Thorne, I am starving. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Julian Thorne was looking for something in her face. Fear, perhaps. Hesitation. The flicker of doubt that would reveal she was bluffing, playing a role, pretending to be more confident than she felt. He found nothing, because Serena was not pretending. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a smile spread across Julian Thorne's face. It transformed his severe features, softened the sharp edges, revealed something almost human beneath the corporate armor. I believe you are, Dr. Mitchell. He turned to his legal team. Final terms. 800 million total valuation. 400 million in cash at signing to be deposited into an account of Dr. Mitchell's choosing. 400 million in stock options vesting over 3 years, with accelerated vesting in the event of acquisition or IPO. Dr. Mitchell retains 15% equity in all intellectual property derived from the Vance Protocol and assumes the role of Chief Scientific Officer with full research autonomy, reporting directly to me. He looked around the table at his assembled executives. All parties, please initial page 47. Papers slid across the polished wood. 14 pens moved in unison, scrawling initials in designated boxes. Serena picked up the pen in front of her. A Mont Blanc, heavy and solid, probably worth more than she used to spend on groceries in a month. This was it. The moment everything changed. Her phone vibrated in her purse. She ignored it. She signed her name in flowing script. Dr. Serena Mitchell. Julian Thorne signed opposite her, his signature sharp and angular, a series of precise strokes that looked more like a mathematical equation than a name. It was done. At 11:23 in the morning on May 14th, Serena Mitchell ceased to be a struggling doctoral student in a failing marriage. At 11:23 in the morning, $400 million was transferred to an account in her name, an account her husband knew nothing about. At 11:23 in the morning, she became one of the wealthiest women in New York City. Julian stood and extended his hand across the table. Welcome to Chimera Global, Dr. Mitchell. Serena shook his hand. His grip was firm, but not crushing, the handshake of someone who did not need to prove his strength through physical intimidation. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Julian, a hint of warmth entered his cold eyes. We are partners now. The meeting concluded with champagne and polite conversation. Dom Prignon, vintage, poured into crystal flutes by silent attendants who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Serena smiled and shook hands and accepted congratulations and said all the things she was supposed to say. But her mind was already racing ahead to the next steps. File for divorce. Find a new apartment. Schedule a prenatal appointment. Tell her parents everything. Watch Mark's face when he realized what he had thrown away. Finally, after what felt like hours of corporate pleasantries, Serena excused herself to check her phone in private. She stepped into a small alcove off the main boardroom, away from the champagne and the congratulations. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from an unknown number, 6 voicemails, and 1 text message that made her blood freeze in her veins. This is Detective James Hendricks, NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. You need to contact me immediately regarding fraud allegations. A warrant has been issued for your arrest. Serena stared at the screen, the champagne celebration curdling in her stomach. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor. She stepped out into the lobby, her mind still reeling from the message, trying to process what it could possibly mean. And then she saw them. 2 men in dark suits were waiting by the security desk. They had the bland, watchful faces of law enforcement, the kind of men who spent their careers observing and judging. Behind them stood 2 uniformed NYPD officers, hands resting on their belts. One of the suited men stepped forward as Serena approached. Serena Mitchell? Her voice came out surprisingly steady. Yes, I am Detective James Hendricks. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The words blurred together as he continued reading her rights. Something about remaining silent, something about an attorney, something about court. None of it made sense. She had never committed fraud. She had never embezzled anything. She had never conspired with anyone except her own research team to build something revolutionary. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists, cold metal biting into her skin. This is a mistake, she said, her voice rising. I have never committed any fraud. I do not even know what you are talking about. The detective's face remained impassive. Ma'am, we have documentation showing you as a consultant for Sterling and Associates Marketing, receiving payments totaling $2.3 million over the past 18 months. Those payments have been traced to fraudulent client invoices. Sterling and Associates, Mark's company, a company she had never worked for, a company she had never set foot in, a company that had nothing to do with her life or her research or anything she had ever done. The pieces began falling into place with horrible clarity. The divorce papers, the timing, the cold calculation in Mark's eyes when he called her a parasite. This was not a coincidence. This was not bad luck. This was a trap, and she had walked right into it. That is my husband's company. Serena's voice was desperate now, pleading. I have never worked there. I have never received any payments from them. You have to believe me. Detective Hendricks took her arm, guiding her toward the glass doors. You can explain it to a judge. Through the doors, she could see photographers waiting on the sidewalk. A dozen cameras, maybe more, all pointed at the entrance. Someone had tipped off the press. Someone had made sure that the whole world would see Dr. Serena Mitchell led away in handcuffs on the day she was supposed to graduate from Columbia University. The cameras flashed like lightning as she was led outside. The headlines were already writing themselves. The holding cell at Manhattan Central Booking was designed to break the human spirit. Gray walls the color of despair. Fluorescent lights that buzzed with a frequency that burrowed into the brain and nested there. Impossible to ignore. Metal benches bolted to concrete floors, cold and hard and unforgiving. The smell of industrial cleaner mixed with human misery, a combination that turned the stomach and lingered in the nostrils long after you left. Serena sat with her back against the wall, still wearing her Tom Ford suit. The charcoal fabric that had made her feel powerful and invincible just hours ago now felt like a costume, a disguise that had failed to fool anyone. Her $800 Louboutin heels were scuffed from the processing room floor. Her red lipstick had faded, leaving her face looking washed out under the harsh lights. She had not been allowed a phone call. She had asked 3 times, and each time she was told that the phones were all in use, that she would have to wait, that someone would come for her eventually. The hours crawled by, each minute stretching into eternity, and still no one came. She did not know if David Cohen knew where she was. She did not know if Julian Thorne had seen the news coverage and decided that Serena Mitchell was too toxic to associate with. She did not know if the $800 million deal she had signed just hours ago was already being voided. Her life's work erased by a morality clause buried somewhere in the 300 pages of legal documents. All she knew was that somewhere in this city, her husband was celebrating. Somewhere, Mark Sterling was pouring champagne and laughing with his mistress and his mother, toasting to their brilliant plan and their flawless execution. A small television was mounted in the corner of the holding area, protected by a cage of metal bars. The other women in the cell ignored it, too lost in their own miseries to care about the outside world. But Serena could not look away. The news anchor was a polished blonde woman with perfect makeup and empty eyes. The kind of woman who delivered tragedy and triumph with the same practiced neutrality. Breaking news this hour, Columbia University PhD graduate Serena Mitchell was arrested today on fraud charges totaling over $2 million. Mitchell, 32, was reportedly in talks for a major corporate acquisition that is now in question. Serena watched her own mugshot flash across the screen. The photograph had been taken during processing. Her face shell-shocked and hollow. Her eyes the eyes of someone who could not comprehend what was happening to her. She barely recognized herself. The anchor continued, Sources tell us that Mitchell was employed as a consultant for Sterling and Associates Marketing, where her husband, Mark Sterling, serves as senior vice president. Authorities allege that Mitchell participated in a scheme to defraud the company's clients of over $2.3 million through falsified invoices and fraudulent billing practices. Sterling and Associates, Mark's company, a company where she had never worked a single day in her entire life. The anchor's voice droned on. We have obtained exclusive footage of Mitchell being led away in handcuffs from 30 Rockefeller Plaza, where sources say she had just completed a meeting with a pharmaceutical giant, Chimera Global. The nature of that meeting is unclear, but representatives from Chimera have declined to comment on the allegations. The screen cut to footage of Serena being walked out of the building. She watched herself stumble slightly on the sidewalk, watched the photographers surge forward like wolves, watched her own face crumple with confusion and fear. In other news, the arrest comes on what was supposed to be Mitchell's graduation day from Columbia University. Her doctoral ceremony began at 10 this morning, but Mitchell was notably absent from the proceedings. The segment ended. Serena closed her eyes. She thought about the baby growing inside her. 8 weeks of cells dividing, multiplying, becoming a person. A person who might be born in a prison hospital if she could not find a way out of this nightmare. She thought about her parents who had probably been sitting in the Columbia Auditorium right now, saving a seat for a daughter who would never arrive. By now they must have seen the news. By now they must be frantic with worry, trying to reach her, trying to understand how their brilliant daughter had ended up in handcuffs. She thought about the deal she had just signed. The $800 million, the $400 million in cash that was sitting in an account she could not access, the stock options that were supposed to vest over 3 years, the research autonomy she had fought so hard to secure, all of it, slipping through her fingers like sand. For the first time since the morning, she allowed herself to cry. 3 weeks earlier, in a luxury apartment in Tribeca, the conspiracy had taken shape. The apartment belonged to Jessica Blake. It was all white furniture and white walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Hudson River. The decor was expensive and soulless, the kind of space that appeared in design magazines but felt cold to actually inhabit. Jessica was 29 years old, a vice president at Sterling and Associates who had clawed her way up through a combination of ruthless ambition and strategic seduction. She had targeted Mark Sterling 6 months ago, identifying him as a man whose ego was larger than his accomplishments, a man who could be manipulated with the right combination of flattery and attention. It had been almost too easy. Now she stood in her pristine kitchen, pouring champagne into 3 crystal flutes, while Mark Sterling lounged on her white leather sofa and his mother Margaret listened via speakerphone from her estate on Long Island. The timing has to be perfect, Mark was saying, his voice animated with the excitement of a man who believed he was smarter than everyone around him. Graduation day. She will be emotional, distracted. She will not see it coming. Margaret Sterling's voice crackled through the speaker. And you are certain the documents will hold up in court? Jessica carried the champagne to the living area, handing one glass to Mark before settling beside him on the sofa. I processed them myself, she said. Backdated invoices going back 18 months, forged signatures on consulting contracts, a bank account opened in her name using identification documents Mark provided from their home office. By the time Serena realizes what is happening, she will already be in handcuffs. Mark took a sip of champagne, his expression smug. The divorce papers are just the distraction, he explained. I served them in the morning. She is devastated, confused, off balance. Then she goes to her pathetic little graduation ceremony. And while she is sitting there feeling sorry for herself, the police arrive with a warrant. And then, Margaret prompted, then her reputation is destroyed. Mark smiled the smile of a man who believed he had thought of everything. No one will believe anything she says about our finances, about our marriage, about anything. She becomes the crazy ex-wife who tried to steal from my company. I become the sympathetic victim, the wronged husband who had no idea his wife was a criminal. Jessica leaned into him, her hand resting possessively on his thigh. And we get married in the spring, just like you promised. Margaret's voice turned sharp. What about the prenuptial agreement situation? I warned you about this 7 years ago, Mark. You should never have married that girl without protecting your assets. Mark's expression flickered with irritation. There is no prenuptial agreement, Mother, you know that. Serena refused to sign one, and I was too in love to insist. He set down his champagne glass with more force than necessary. But this fixes everything. Do you not understand? If Serena is convicted of fraud, she loses all credibility. Any claim she might make about marital assets will be dismissed as the desperate lies of a convicted criminal. I walk away clean. And if she fights, Margaret asked, that girl has always been stubborn. She will not have the resources to fight, Mark said confidently. Her family has nothing. Her research earns nothing. She has been completely dependent on me for 7 years. Without my money, she cannot afford a decent lawyer. She will take whatever deal the public defender offers and disappear quietly. Jessica raised her glass. To fresh starts. Mark clinked his glass against hers. To fresh starts. Through the speakerphone, Margaret Sterling's voice joined the toast, and the sound of clinking crystal echoed through the line. None of them knew that the woman they were plotting to destroy had spent the past 3 years building an empire in the shadows. None of them knew that the pathetic wife who contributed nothing was about to sign a deal that would make her worth more than all of them combined. None of them knew that their cruelty was planting the seeds of their own destruction. But they would learn. 6 hours after her arrest, Serena was still in the holding cell when a guard appeared at the barred door. The guard was a heavy-set woman with tired eyes and a voice that suggested she had seen too much human misery to be surprised by any of it. Mitchell, your lawyer is here. Serena stood on legs that had gone numb from sitting on the metal bench for hours. She was led down a fluorescent corridor, past holding cells filled with other women in various states of despair, past processing rooms where officers typed endless reports, past vending machines that offered stale snacks and terrible coffee. The private meeting room was small and sparse, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs on either side, a camera in the corner that may or may not have been recording. She expected to see David Cohen's familiar face. Instead, she found Julian Thorne standing by the narrow window, staring out at a view of concrete and razor wire. He was still wearing the same suit from the morning's meeting, but his tie was loosened slightly and the top button of his shirt was undone. He looked tired and angry. The cold corporate mask had slipped, revealing something more human beneath. Serena stopped in the doorway, uncertain. What are you doing here? Julian turned to face her. His ice blue eyes swept over her appearance, taking in the wrinkled suit, the smeared makeup, the haunted expression of a woman who had experienced too much in too short a time. Protecting my investment, he gestured to the chair across from him. Sit down, Dr. Mitchell. We have a great deal to discuss. Serena lowered herself into the chair, acutely aware of how she must look, how she must smell. 6 hours in a holding cell did not do wonders for personal presentation. Julian sat across from her, his movements precise and controlled. Bail has been posted, $500,000 cash. Serena felt her stomach drop. I cannot pay that back. Not now. The deal might be voided because of the morality clause. The money I just signed for might already be frozen. I have nothing. The deal is not voided. Julian's voice was firm, brooking no argument. Not yet. My lawyers have been reviewing the situation since the moment you were arrested. The morality clause allows termination in the event of proven criminal conduct. You have not been proven guilty of anything. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. You did not do this, did you? No, I know. Julian nodded once, as if confirming something he had already decided. I have already started an investigation of my own. The fraud documents are amateurish. Whoever set you up was sloppy and overconfident. Serena felt something loosen in her chest. For the first time in hours, someone believed her. Someone with the resources to actually help her. My husband. The words came out bitter and broken. Mark, he served me divorce papers this morning, 2 hours before the signing. He called me a parasite. He said I had contributed nothing to our marriage. He has been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Julian's expression hardened into something dangerous. Then we have 72 hours before my board convenes to vote on the morality clause. That is how long you have to prove your innocence and destroy the people who tried to destroy you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone, a sleek device with no identifying marks, and slid it across the table. I am not doing this out of altruism, Dr. Mitchell. I do not believe in altruism. I have spent $400 million on your company today. I do not intend to lose that investment because some mediocre marketing executive decided to frame his wife for crimes she did not commit. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Besides, I find myself curious. I have negotiated with heads of state and captains of industry and people who control the fate of nations. I have never seen anyone walk into my boardroom and challenge me the way you did this morning. I want to see what you do when you are truly cornered. Serena picked up the phone, feeling its weight in her hand. Why? She asked again. There has to be more to it than protecting your investment. You could walk away from this deal and lose some money. You could void the contract and find another enzyme, another researcher, another acquisition target. Why are you personally posting bail and conducting investigations? Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, softer, more human, as if the corporate armor had cracked just slightly. 20 years ago, I was a junior analyst at a hedge fund in Boston. I discovered that one of the senior partners was running an insider trading scheme that had been going on for years. I reported it to the SEC. I thought I was doing the right thing. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Instead of arresting the partner, the SEC buried my complaint. Someone tipped him off that I was the whistleblower. Within a week, I was being arrested for a trade I never made, using fabricated evidence and false testimony. What happened? I was 26 years old, facing 20 years in federal prison for securities fraud. My fiancée left me. My family stopped returning my calls. My friends disappeared. Everyone I had ever trusted assumed I was guilty because that was easier than believing I might be innocent. He turned to face her, and for just a moment, Serena saw something raw in his eyes, something that recognized her own pain. One person believed me, a journalist named Catherine Wells. She spent 6 months of her life digging through records, interviewing sources, following paper trails. She found the evidence that proved I was innocent and exposed the real criminal. He paused. That partner went to prison. I built Chimera Global on the ashes of his career. Everything I have today, every dollar, every acquisition, every success, began with someone believing in me when the rest of the world thought I was guilty. Serena waited, sensing there was more. Catherine died 2 years after my acquittal. Cancer. She was 43 years old. I never got to repay her for what she did for me. Julian's eyes met Serena's across the small room. I see her in you, the way you fight, the way you refuse to give up even when everything is stacked against you. Maybe this is my way of finally paying that debt. He straightened, the corporate mask sliding back into place. But that does not mean I am going soft, Dr. Mitchell. We have 72 hours. I suggest we get started. The Peninsula Hotel suite had been transformed into a command center. Laptops covered every available surface, their screens glowing with spreadsheets and legal documents and surveillance footage. Whiteboards lined the walls, covered in timelines and names and arrows connecting seemingly unrelated pieces of information. Empty coffee cups accumulated in corners, evidence of long hours and sleepless nights. The air smelled of tension and desperation and the particular kind of focus that comes when everything is on the line. Serena sat at the center of it all, freshly showered and wearing borrowed clothes, her wet hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had slept for 3 hours after being released on bail, and even that brief rest had felt like a luxury she could not afford. 48 hours had passed since her arrest. 48 hours of questioning and depositions and strategy sessions that stretched until 3 in the morning. 48 hours of watching her reputation be shredded on every news channel in the city. But she was not alone anymore. Around her sat the team that Julian had assembled with the ruthless efficiency of a man accustomed to solving impossible problems. David Cohen, her attorney, was pacing by the window. His usual polished appearance had given way to rolled-up sleeves and 5 o'clock shadow. He had slept even less than Serena. Elena Vasquez, Julian's head of corporate security, sat at a laptop with her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was a former FBI special agent who had spent 15 years investigating financial crimes before moving to the private sector. Her calm demeanor suggested she had seen much worse than a corporate frame job. Daniel Chase, a forensic accountant with a reputation for finding hidden money, was surrounded by towers of financial documents. He had been brought in specifically for this case, recommended by contacts at the Department of Justice as the best in the business. And Julian Thorne himself, who had canceled meetings worth hundreds of millions of dollars to be present for every strategy session. He sat in the corner, watching everything with those cold blue eyes, occasionally asking questions that cut straight to the heart of whatever problem they were discussing. "Talk to me, Daniel." David stopped pacing and turned to face the accountant. "What have you found?" Daniel pushed his glasses up his nose and spread a series of documents across the conference table. His expression was the barely contained excitement of someone who had discovered something important. "Sterling and Associates has been insolvent for 18 months. David leaned forward. "Insolvent? They reported $12 million in revenue last quarter. Fabricated." Daniel pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop and turned it so everyone could see. "They have been cooking the books, falsifying revenue figures, and paying dividends from client funds. It is essentially a Ponzi scheme waiting to collapse. The $2.3 million they claim Serena embezzled is actually money that Mark Sterling and Jessica Blake stole from their own clients." Serena stared at the numbers on the screen, trying to process what she was seeing. "They framed me for their own crimes, exactly." Daniel nodded. "They needed a scapegoat, someone to blame when the whole thing fell apart. By pinning the fraud on you, they could claim to be victims rather than perpetrators. They would probably have collected insurance money on top of everything else." Elena spoke up from her position at the laptop. "There is more. I obtained security footage from the bank branch where the fraudulent account in Serena's name was opened." She turned the laptop so everyone could see. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to identify the woman standing at the teller window, presenting identification. "Facial recognition confirms that is Jessica Blake. She used a fake ID with Serena's name, but her own photograph. The teller was new and did not notice the discrepancy. Through the bank's front window, a familiar BMW was visible in the parking lot. Mark Sterling's car. He was waiting outside while his mistress opened the account in my name." Serena's voice was flat. "They planned this together." David nodded grimly. "Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, falsifying documents. These are federal charges. They are looking at decades in prison if we can prove it. When we prove it." Julian corrected from his corner. "Not if, when." Elena pulled up another file. "I also found something interesting about Margaret Sterling. She has been making large cash withdrawals from an account that does not appear in any of her public financial disclosures. An account that was apparently hidden during her divorce from Mark's father 20 years ago." "How much?" David asked. $8 million. And I traced several transfers from that account to Mark's company over the past year. She has been keeping Sterling and Associates afloat while they figured out how to blame someone else for the missing money. So it is all three of them." Serena felt the pieces clicking into place. "Mark, Jessica, and Margaret. They planned this together. They executed it together. And they were going to get away with it if Julian had not believed me. They are still going to get away with it unless we find irrefutable proof." David ran a hand through his hair. "Bank footage and financial records are good, but a skilled defense attorney could create reasonable doubt. We need something that proves intent, something that shows they knew exactly what they were doing." Serena's phone, the regular one that had been returned to her after processing, buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. She read it twice, then showed it to the room. "I know what really happened at Sterling and Associates. Meet me tomorrow, 2 in the afternoon, Bryant Park Fountain. Come alone, or I will not talk. A friend." Julian's eyes narrowed. It could be a trap. "It could be," Serena agreed, "but right now it is the only lead we have that might give us what we need." Bryant Park was crowded with the lunch rush. Office workers in expensive suits ate overpriced salads on benches. Tourists posed for photographs in front of the library. Street vendors hawked pretzels and bottled water and knockoff designer handbags. Serena sat on the edge of the fountain, trying to look casual while her heart pounded in her chest. She was wearing simple clothes, nothing that would draw attention, but she felt exposed, visible, like everyone who passed by knew exactly who she was and what she had been accused of doing. Elena Vasquez was stationed at a coffee cart 50 yards away, watching everything through designer sunglasses. David Cohen was in a car on 42nd Street, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. Julian had wanted to come himself, but Serena had convinced him that his presence would be too conspicuous. A woman approached, mid-30s, professional dress, clearly nervous. She sat down on the edge of the fountain, not quite looking at Serena, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dr. Mitchell? Yes. The woman glanced around, checking for observers, for cameras, for anyone who might be listening. My name is Rachel Peterson. I was an executive assistant at Sterling and Associates until 6 months ago. I was fired after I reported Jessica Blake for harassment. Serena studied the woman's face, looking for signs of deception. Why are you contacting me now? Rachel's hands were trembling slightly, because I was there when they planned this. I heard them in Mark's office. Him, Jessica, his mother, on speakerphone. They were laughing about how they would finally get rid of the scholarship girl. The phrase hit Serena like a physical blow. Scholarship girl. That was what Margaret had called her behind her back for 7 years. Only someone who had actually heard that conversation would know to use those exact words. Did you record the conversation? Serena asked. No, Rachel shook her head. I did not realize what they were planning until it was too late. But I know where the evidence is. The real evidence. Everything you need to prove what they did. Where? Rachel lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. Jessica keeps a backup of everything on a personal server in her apartment. She is paranoid about Mark betraying her someday, so she documents everything. Every email, every invoice, every wire transfer. If there is proof that they framed you, it is on that server. How do we access it? Rachel hesitated. The server is accessible remotely if you have the password. And Jessica, being paranoid, writes all her passwords in a notebook that she keeps in her desk at work. She thinks no one knows about it, but I used to organize her files. I have seen it. Serena's mind was racing. Sterling and Associates is under investigation. The office must be complete chaos right now. Exactly. Rachel finally met her eyes. When I was fired, they were supposed to collect my master key, but HR was so eager to escort me out of the building that they forgot. I still have access. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small brass key, pressing it into Serena's palm. Help me take them down, Dr. Mitchell. They destroyed my career. They destroyed my reputation. They took everything from me because I told the truth about what Jessica was doing. I want them to know what that feels like. Serena looked at the key in her hand. Such a small thing to hold so much potential. Why should I trust you? Rachel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice cracked. After they fired me, I could not get hired anywhere. They had spread rumors that I was a thief, that I had been stealing from the company. I lost my apartment. I had to move back in with my mother in New Jersey at 34 years old. I spent 3 months applying for jobs and getting rejected because of what they said about me. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I know what it feels like to have your life destroyed by people who think they are untouchable. I know what it feels like to have everyone assume you are guilty because that is easier than believing you might be innocent. You are not alone in this, Dr. Mitchell, and neither am I. Serena made a decision. If we do this, you are protected. No matter what happens, your name stays out of it. Rachel nodded. All I want is to see them fall. The war room was tense when Serena returned with the key and the information Rachel had provided. David spread blueprints of Sterling and Associates across the conference table. The forensic audit results are being leaked to financial journalists tomorrow morning. By 9 o'clock, every news outlet in the city will be running stories about the company's fraudulent practices. The office will be chaos. Employees scrambling to save themselves. Lawyers confiscating documents. Everyone too distracted to notice one more person in a service uniform. He pointed to the blueprints. Jessica's office is on the 14th floor. Corner office, south side. According to Rachel, the notebook with the passwords is in the top right drawer of her desk. Elena looked up from her laptop. I can access the server remotely once we have the passwords. If Jessica is as paranoid as Rachel says, she will have documented everything. Every conversation, every transaction, every piece of evidence we need. Julian spoke from his corner of the room. I have one condition. If we do this and we find what we are looking for, we do not just clear Serena's name. We destroy them completely, publicly, permanently. His eyes met Serena's across the room. Are you prepared for that? Serena thought about Mark, about the divorce papers, about being called a parasite, about the baby growing inside her that she had not been able to tell him about because he had not cared enough to listen. She thought about Jessica, about the red heart emoji, about the 6 months of betrayal while Serena had been working herself to exhaustion, trying to build something meaningful. She thought about Margaret, about 7 years of thinly veiled contempt, about being called the scholarship girl, about never being good enough for her precious son. They tried to take everything from me, Serena said quietly. My freedom, my reputation, my life's work, my baby. She looked at Julian. I want them to lose everything too. Julian nodded once. Then let us begin. Sterling and Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower on Madison Avenue. On any normal day, the lobby would have been filled with the purposeful bustle of marketing executives rushing to meetings and clients being escorted to impressive conference rooms. Today was not a normal day. The news had broken at exactly 9 o'clock, just as David had predicted. Every financial news outlet in the city was running the same story, each one trying to outdo the others with increasingly dramatic headlines. Marketing firm under investigation for $15 million in client fund fraud. Sterling and Associates executives face massive fraud allegations. Clients demand answers as marketing giant teeters on collapse. Rachel Peterson walked through the service entrance at exactly 10:15 in the morning. She was wearing a catering uniform that Elena had procured from a supply company in Queens. She carried a tray of coffee cups that no one had ordered, her face carefully blank, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone must be able to hear it. The lobby was absolute chaos. Employees were streaming out of the building carrying boxes of personal belongings, their faces masks of shock and fear. Lawyers in expensive suits were confiscating computers and filing cabinets and anything else that might contain evidence. Security guards were arguing with reporters who had somehow made it past the front desk. The elevators were packed with people trying to escape before the ship finished sinking. No one paid any attention to the woman in the catering uniform. Rachel took the service elevator to the 14th floor. The hallway was deserted. Everyone was either in the lobby dealing with the crisis or hiding in their offices praying that no one would notice them. Jessica Blake's office door was closed. Rachel tried the handle, unlocked. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment to catch her breath. The office was exactly as she remembered it. Expensive furniture that Jessica had billed to the company as a business expense. Pretentious artwork that she had claimed was necessary for impressing clients. A collection of awards and accolades that Rachel happened to know Jessica had purchased for herself from various pay-to-play business organizations. Rachel moved to the desk and pulled on the top right drawer. Locked. She pulled out the master key that HR had forgotten to collect 6 months ago and inserted it into the lock. The mechanism clicked. The drawer slid open. Inside, exactly where Rachel had said it would be, was a leather-bound notebook filled with Jessica's paranoid notations. Passwords for every account she had ever created, security codes, access credentials, insurance against the day when Mark Sterling inevitably decided she was no longer useful. Rachel photographed every page. Then she slipped out of the office, down the service stairs, through the loading dock, and into the waiting car on the side street. No one saw her leave. The war room at the Peninsula Hotel was silent as Elena Vasquez entered the passwords from Jessica's notebook into her laptop. The first attempt failed. The second attempt failed. The third attempt succeeded. I am in, Elena announced. Serena leaned forward as the contents of Jessica's personal server filled the screen. It was everything. Emails between Mark, Jessica, and Margaret going back over 2 years. Some were mundane, scheduling dinners and coordinating alibis. Others were devastating, explicit discussions of how to frame Serena, how to ensure she had no resources to fight back, how to time the arrest for maximum humiliation. Original invoices before they were doctored to include Serena's name. Clean versions that proved the fraud was entirely the work of Mark and Jessica. Wire transfer records showing money flowing from Margaret's hidden account to offshore banks in the Cayman Islands. $8 million of stolen client funds, hidden beyond the reach of American authorities. And then Elena clicked on a video file labeled insurance. The screen filled with footage from what appeared to be a hidden camera in Mark's office. The quality was grainy, clearly recorded on a small device concealed somewhere in the room, but the audio was crystal clear. On screen, Mark was visible sitting behind his desk. Jessica was perched on the edge of that desk, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. Margaret's voice came through a speakerphone sitting between them. Mark was speaking, his voice animated with excitement. The timing has to be perfect. Graduation day. She will be emotional, distracted. She will not see it coming. Margaret's voice crackled through the speaker. And you are certain the police will cooperate? Mark grinned, the same charming smile that had once made Serena believe he loved her. I have a contact in the financial crimes unit, Detective Hendricks. He owes me a favor from a situation a few years back. By the time Serena realizes what is happening, she will already be in handcuffs. Jessica laughed, a cruel sound, and then she is finished. No one will ever believe a word she says. We can take everything. Margaret's voice again. What about the baby? If she gets pregnant, that complicates things. Mark waved his hand dismissively. She is not pregnant. I made sure of that. I have been telling her for years that I do not want children until she finishes her useless degree. By the time the divorce is final, I will have full control of the narrative. She will be a convicted criminal. No court will give her anything. The video ended. Silence in the room. David Cohen let out a long breath. That is conspiracy, witness tampering, fraud, corruption of a public official, obstruction of justice. They are all looking at federal charges, decades in prison. Serena stared at the frozen image of her husband's smiling face, the man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed for, the man who had been planning her destruction while she was building an empire in secret to surprise him. Not just prison, she said quietly. I want them to lose everything, everything they have, everything they thought they would gain. I want them to know what it feels like to have your life destroyed by someone you trusted. Julian spoke from his corner of the room. Then we give this to the press. We hold a conference tomorrow morning. We release everything, the emails, the financial records, the video. We let the world see exactly who they are. And the baby? David asked carefully. If you go public with this, everyone will know you are pregnant. It will become part of the story. Serena thought about the life growing inside of him, the secret she had been keeping, the announcement she had planned to make on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Good, she said. Let them know. Let everyone know that they tried to frame a pregnant woman, that they tried to take a mother's child, that they were so certain of their own superiority that they never bothered to find out who they were really dealing with. She looked at Julian. I am done hiding. I am done pretending to be less than I am. It is time for them to learn exactly who I actually am. The lobby of Chimera Global had been transformed into a press conference venue. Camera crews from every major network jockeyed for position. Reporters clutched notebooks and microphones and tablets, ready to capture every word. Photographers lined the walls, their cameras clicking in a constant rhythm like the heartbeat of a hungry beast. The world was watching. Serena stood behind the podium, Julian Thorne positioned at her side like a sentinel. She had chosen her outfit carefully for this moment, an elegant cream-colored dress that subtly emphasized the curve of her pregnancy. Professional enough for a business announcement, feminine enough to remind everyone that she was a woman who had been wronged, powerful without being aggressive. She looked out at the sea of cameras and took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, my husband of 7 years served me divorce papers on my graduation day. The room went quiet. Every camera focused on her face. He called me a burden. He called me worthless. He said I had no ambition and would never amount to anything. He said I was a parasite who had been draining his resources for years. She paused, letting the words settle into the silence. 2 hours later, I signed an $800 million acquisition deal with Chimera Global. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Reporters exchanged glances. My husband did not know about my company. He did not know about the deal. He did not know about the 3 years of secret work, the patents, the research that will change the pharmaceutical industry. He did not know because for 7 years, I hid my success to protect his ego. Her voice hardened. I made myself small so that a small man could feel big. The cameras clicked faster. When I refused to sign his divorce papers quietly, my husband conspired with his mistress and his mother to frame me for crimes I did not commit. They forged documents. They fabricated evidence. They bribed a corrupt police detective. They wanted to destroy my reputation, void my business deal, and ensure that I would spend years fighting criminal charges I could never disprove. She gestured to the screens behind her, which lit up with excerpts from the emails they had recovered. These are communications between Mark Sterling, Jessica Blake, and Margaret Sterling discussing their plan to frame me. These are the original invoices before they were doctored to include my name. These are wire transfer records showing stolen client funds being hidden in offshore accounts. The screen changed to show a still image from the video. And this is video footage of all three of them discussing their conspiracy, recorded without their knowledge by Jessica Blake's own security system. The video played. Mark's voice filled the room, casual and confident, discussing how he would have his wife arrested on her graduation day. The reporters watched in stunned silence. When the video ended, Serena spoke again. Mark Sterling, Jessica Blake, and Margaret Sterling are not victims. They are criminals. They stole millions of dollars from innocent clients. They framed an innocent woman. They conspired to take an unborn child from its mother. She placed her hand on her stomach. Yes, I'm pregnant. I found out 2 weeks before my husband served me divorce papers. I was planning to surprise him with the news at our anniversary dinner, the same night I was going to reveal the company I had built in secret. Her eyes swept the room. He never gave me the chance to tell him. He was too busy planning my destruction to care about anything I might have to say. She straightened her shoulders. As of this morning, arrest warrants have been issued for all three of them. The charges include wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and corruption of a public official. If convicted, they face decades in federal prison. The room erupted with questions. Reporters shouted over each other, desperate to be heard. Serena held up her hand for silence. I am not a victim. I refuse to be defined by what they tried to do to me. I am a scientist. I am a businesswoman. I am about to become a mother. And I am going to spend the rest of my life building things that matter, creating things that help people, while they spend theirs in prison cells wondering how everything went so wrong. She looked directly into the cameras. To everyone watching who has ever been told they are not good enough, who has ever been underestimated or dismissed or made to feel small, who has ever hidden their light so that someone else could feel brighter. Her voice softened. Stop hiding. The people who try to diminish you do it because they are afraid of what you might become. Do not let their fear become your prison. Shine anyway. She stepped back from the podium. Julian leaned toward the microphone. Questions will be answered by our legal team in the next room. Dr. Mitchell has a company to run. He guided her out through a side door, leaving the chaos of the press conference behind. The arrests happened simultaneously across the city. Jessica Blake was taken into custody at 11:15 in the morning. 2 FBI agents knocked on the door of her Tribeca apartment while she was still in her bathrobe, drinking coffee and scrolling through news coverage of the Sterling and Associates collapse. She did not believe them at first. She thought it was a joke or a mistake or some kind of elaborate prank. When they showed her the warrant, she started screaming, "This is not possible. This is all Serena's fault. She set me up. She must have planted that video. I want my lawyer. I want to speak to Mark. This is a mistake." The agents were unmoved. She was read her rights, handcuffed, and led out of her luxury apartment in front of a crowd of reporters who had been tipped off about the arrest. The cameras captured every moment of her humiliation. The bathrobe, the mascara running down her face, the disbelief that this could actually be happening to her. Margaret Sterling was arrested at her country club at 11:45. She was in the middle of her regular Tuesday bridge game, surrounded by the other wealthy widows and socialites who formed her inner circle. The FBI agents walked into the private dining room and asked her to step outside for a moment. Margaret refused. "I do not know who you think you are, but this is a private club, members only. Whatever this is about, you can discuss it with my attorney." The agents explained that they had a warrant for her arrest on charges including conspiracy, fraud, and corruption of a public official. Margaret laughed. "That is absurd. I am a Sterling. Do you have any idea who my family is, who my connections are? I will have your badges by the end of the day." The agents handcuffed her anyway. She was led out through the main dining room, past the shocked faces of women she had known for decades. past the staff who had served her for years, past the walls lined with photographs of club events where she had been prominently featured. Her friends watched in horror as Margaret Sterling, pillar of Manhattan society, was escorted to a waiting FBI vehicle and driven away. None of them would ever speak to her again. Mark Sterling tried to run. He had seen the press conference on television from his mother's estate on Long Island, where he had been hiding since the news of the Sterling and Associates investigation broke. He watched Serena stand at that podium in her cream dress, looking beautiful and powerful, and nothing like the pathetic wife he had discarded just days ago. He watched the video of himself discussing the frame job play on national television. He watched his entire life collapse in real time. Without a word to anyone, he grabbed his keys and ran to his beanbite. His plan was desperate and half-formed. Drive to the Canadian border, cross somewhere remote, figure out the rest later. He made it to a checkpoint in upstate New York before being stopped. The state police officer who approached his window was a woman, tall, professional, completely unimpressed by his expensive car and designer clothes. Mark Sterling? Mark tried to smile. He tried to summon the charm that had always gotten him out of trouble before. Officer, there has been a terrible misunderstanding. I can explain everything if you just give me a chance. Step out of the vehicle, sir. You do not understand. My wife is crazy. She has been planning this for months. She fabricated evidence. The officer opened his door. Mark Sterling, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying evidence. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you? Mark's charm evaporated, replaced by something desperate and ugly. This is her fault. Serena did this. She ruined everything. She was supposed to be nothing. She was supposed to be worthless. The officer handcuffed him without expression. Sir, I do not care. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. The BMW was impounded. Mark was transported back to Manhattan in the back of a police cruiser, watching his freedom disappear with every passing mile, finally understanding that the woman he had called a parasite had just destroyed everything he had ever cared about, and she was only getting started. The Manhattan Federal Courthouse was a monument to American justice. Marble columns rose toward a ceiling painted with murals of democracy and law. The corridors echoed with the footsteps of attorneys and defendants and the families of both, all seeking some form of resolution to the conflicts that had brought them here. 3 months after the arrests, the trial of Mark Sterling, Jessica Blake, and Margaret Sterling had become a national sensation. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Reporters lined the walls, their notebooks ready, their cameras confiscated at the security checkpoint, but their memories sharp. The overflow crowd watched on screens in adjacent rooms. Social media buzzed with real-time commentary, #Justice for Serena, trending for the 6th consecutive day. The prosecution was led by Patricia Wells, a former federal prosecutor now working for the Department of Justice. She was 53 years old, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of face that suggested she had seen too much corruption to be surprised by any of it. She was known in legal circles for her methodical preparation and devastating cross-examinations. Her case was surgical in its precision. She presented the video of the conspiracy, playing it twice for the jury so that every word, every laugh, every casual reference to destroying an innocent woman could be absorbed and understood. She presented the forged documents with expert testimony from handwriting analysts who explained in painstaking detail how they could prove that Serena's signature had been fabricated. She presented the bank records, with forensic accountants walking the jury through the labyrinth of wire transfers and shell companies and offshore accounts that Mark and Jessica had created to hide their theft. She presented testimony from the corrupt colleague of Detective Hendricks, who had cut a deal in exchange for telling the truth about the bribes he had received and the evidence he had helped fabricate. By the end of the prosecution's case, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The only question was how long the defendants would spend in prison. Mark Sterling took the stand in his own defense, against the advice of his attorney. He believed he could still charm his way out of this. He believed that if he could just explain his side of the story, the jury would understand that he was the real victim here, that Serena had manipulated everyone, that he had been forced into an impossible situation by a wife who had deceived him for years. He was wrong. Patricia Wells approached him with a folder full of evidence and a smile that promised nothing good. Mr. Sterling, she began, did you or did you not tell your mother that you wanted to, quote, finally get rid of the scholarship girl? Mark shifted in his seat. The witness chair suddenly felt very small. That was taken out of context. I was frustrated with my marriage. We all say things we do not mean when we are frustrated. Did you or did you not forge your wife's signature on consulting contracts she never signed? Jessica handled the paperwork. I did not personally forge anything. I just signed off on documents that she prepared. So you are claiming that you participated in a scheme to frame your wife, but bear no responsibility for it because someone else did the actual forging? Mark's attorney objected. Patricia rephrased. Mr. Sterling, did you know that the consulting contracts bearing your wife's signature were fraudulent when you submitted them to your company's accounting department? I believe they were legitimate at the time. You believe they were legitimate. Patricia pulled a document from her folder. Even though you testified earlier that your wife had never worked for Sterling and Associates, never had access to your office, and never participated in any company business? Mark's face reddened. I was confused. There was a lot happening. I did not keep track of every document that crossed my desk. Let me ask you something else, Mr. Sterling. Patricia's voice hardened. Did you or did you not know that your wife was pregnant when you filed for custody and accused her of violence? Silence. The entire courtroom held its breath. Mark's eyes darted to the jury, to his attorney, to anywhere except Patricia Wells' face. I did what I had to do to protect my future, he finally said. A gasp ran through the gallery. So you admit, Patricia pressed, that you filed false accusations of violence against a pregnant woman, knowing that those accusations were lies? Mark's attorney objected again. The judge overruled him. Answer the question, Mr. Sterling. Mark's mask slipped completely. She was supposed to be nothing. His voice rose, taking on an edge of desperation and anger. She was supposed to be a nobody, a struggling student with no money and no prospects and no future. I was the one who was supposed to be successful. I was the one who was supposed to matter. He pointed at Serena sitting in the gallery. She lied to me for years. She built that company behind my back. She made me look like a fool. Everything I did was because she drove me to it. Silence in the courtroom. Patricia Wells let the moment stretch, let the jury absorb the full ugliness of what they had just witnessed. No further questions, she said. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Mark Sterling, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. All assets seized. The judge read the sentence without emotion, just another day in a courtroom where lives were routinely destroyed by the consequences of bad choices. Mark stood motionless as the verdict was read. He had expected acquittal. He had expected vindication. He had expected the jury to see through Serena's lies and recognize him as the real victim. He had expected wrong. Jessica Blake, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Jessica sobbed as she was led away, mascara running down her face for the second time in 3 months. She had believed Mark when he promised her they would never be caught. She had believed they were smarter than everyone else. She had believed wrong. Margaret Sterling, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. The hidden account containing $8 million was forfeited to the state. Her ex-husband was filing a civil suit for fraud and would eventually win an additional $5 million judgment against her estate. Margaret did not cry. She did not beg. She just stared straight ahead as her sentence was read, her face frozen in an expression of aristocratic contempt, as if the entire proceeding was beneath her dignity. It did not matter what expression she wore. She was going to prison just the same. As the defendants were led away to begin their sentences, Mark passed within feet of Serena. Their eyes met. Serena, please. Mark's voice cracked. I am sorry. I loved you. I was just scared. I felt like you were slipping away from me, becoming someone I did not recognize. I made terrible choices because I was afraid of losing you. Serena stood. She was visibly pregnant now, 5 months along, her body changing in ways that reminded her daily of the new life she was building. She looked at the man who had called her worthless, the man who had tried to frame her for crimes she did not commit, the man who had attempted to take her child before that child was even born. You never loved me, Mark. Her voice was steady. You loved having someone to feel superior to. You loved having someone to control. You loved having someone who made you feel big by being small. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the steel in her eyes. That is not love. That is ownership. And I was never yours to own. She turned her back on him. The doors closed. And Serena Mitchell walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight of a world that finally knew the truth. Have you ever held something so precious that you were afraid to breathe? Afraid that any movement, any sound, any acknowledgement of its existence might cause it to shatter like glass? That is what Serena felt the first time she held her daughter. Hope Julian Mitchell was born on a Tuesday evening in November, nearly 6 months after the trial ended. The private birthing suite at Mount Sinai Hospital was filled with soft lighting and flowers from well-wishers around the world. Classical music played quietly from hidden speakers. The air smelled of antiseptic and new life and possibility. Serena lay in the hospital bed, exhausted from 12 hours of labor, her hair damp with sweat, her body aching in ways she had not known were possible. But none of that mattered, because in her arms was a miracle. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair like her mother, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything, even though the doctors said newborns could not really see much at all. Tiny fingers that curled and uncurled like question marks, exploring a world she had only just entered. "She is perfect," Serena whispered, and her voice broke on the words. Her parents stood nearby. Her mother was crying openly, tears streaming down her weathered face. Her father was pretending he was not crying, but failing miserably. They had been there for every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every moment of the past 5 months when Serena had needed support. They had believed in her when no one else did. They had loved her when she felt unlovable. They had flown from Ohio to Manhattan a dozen times, never complaining about the expense or the inconvenience, because that is what parents did for their children. And now they were grandparents. The door to the birthing suite opened quietly. Julian Thorne stood in the doorway holding a bouquet of white roses. He was wearing a simple navy sweater and dark pants, more casual than Serena had ever seen him. For the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain, almost nervous. "You can come closer," Serena said. "She does not bite yet." Julian approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the tiny face wrapped in a pink blanket. He moved with the careful precision of a man who had faced down hostile corporate boards and international competitors, but had never encountered anything quite like a newborn baby. "She is beautiful," he said quietly. "She looks exactly like you." That is the idea. Their eyes met across the hospital bed, and something passed between them. Something that had been building for months, through crisis and triumph, and the long quiet evenings when they had talked about everything and nothing. In the years since Serena's arrest, Julian had become more than an investor, more than an ally, more than a friend. He had been there for every court date, every strategy session, every moment when she had needed someone who understood what it meant to be destroyed by lies and rebuilt by truth. He had shared his own story of betrayal and redemption, opening up about the darkness he had faced and the light that had eventually found him. He had listened to her fears about motherhood, about running a company, about building a life from the rubble of everything she had lost. He had never pressured her, never demanded anything, never made her feel that his support came with strings attached. He had simply been there. "Julian, I need to ask you something." Serena's voice was soft, uncertain. She was not used to being uncertain. "Anything. Hope needs a father, not the man who is spending the next 12 years in a prison cell, not someone who tried to take her before she was even born. A real father. Someone who will be there for her, who will teach her, who will protect her." She reached out and took his hand. "I am not asking you to marry me, not yet. I am not even sure what I am asking, but I need to know if you want to be part of our lives. Really part of them. Not as an investor or a business partner or someone who shows up for meetings and disappears afterward." She looked at the baby in her arms. "I need to know if you can love her, even though she is not yours by blood." Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more human. The corporate mask had fallen away entirely. "I have spent 20 years building an empire," he said slowly, "acquiring companies, destroying competitors, making money in amounts that most people cannot comprehend. I have done things I am not proud of, and things I am proud of, and things that I am not sure how to feel about. He touched Hope's tiny hand. Her fingers curled around his, impossibly small against his palm. But I have never built anything that mattered. Not really. Not like this. He looked at Serena. You asked me once why I helped you when you were arrested. I told you about Catherine Wells, the journalist who believed in me when everyone else thought I was guilty. Yes. What I did not tell you is that I loved her. Julian's voice cracked. Not romantically. Something deeper than that. She was the first person who ever saw me for who I really was, not who I pretended to be. And when she died, I closed off that part of myself. I told myself that I did not need anyone, that caring about people was a weakness that would only lead to more pain. He sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding Hope's tiny hand. Then you walked into my boardroom and challenged me like no one ever has. You refused to be intimidated. You refused to back down. You showed me that strength and vulnerability are not opposites. They are two sides of the same coin. His eyes met hers. I would be honored to be part of your lives. Both of your lives, not because I feel obligated, not because of business, because somewhere in the past year, you became the most important person in my world. And I think I would like to spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of that. Serena felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. That was a lot of words for you, I know. Julian smiled back. I have been practicing. Hope made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. Both of them looked down at her. I think she approves, Serena said. I hope so. Julian leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on Hope's forehead. I plan to spoil her terribly. 2 years passed. The wedding was held at a private estate in the Hamptons on a perfect September afternoon. The sky was cloudless and blue, the air warm with the last breath of summer. The gardens were in full bloom, explosions of color that seemed almost impossibly beautiful. Just 50 guests had been invited. No press, no cameras, no fanfare, just the people who mattered. Serena's parents, still crying at every milestone in their daughter's life. Julian's sister, who had flown in from London. David Cohen and his wife. Elena Vasquez. Thomas, Serena's research partner from the earliest days of Vance Biosynth. Rachel Peterson was there too, seated in the third row. After the trial, Serena had helped her find a job at Chimera Global. Rachel was now head of human resources for the biotech division, responsible for ensuring that no one else would ever be fired for telling the truth. Serena walked down the aisle in a simple ivory gown, her father holding her arm. He was crying again, had been crying all morning, and showed no signs of stopping. Hope toddled ahead of them as the flower girl. She was 2 years old now, with her mother's dark hair and a personality that could only be described as formidable. She took her flower girl duties very seriously, throwing petals with aggressive enthusiasm, most of them missing the aisle entirely, but charming everyone in attendance regardless. Julian waited at the altar in a perfectly tailored gray suit. His ice blue eyes were soft, warm, nothing like the cold corporate stare that had once intimidated boardrooms around the world. For the first time in anyone's memory, he looked nervous. The officiant spoke the familiar words, the promises that humans had been making to each other for thousands of years. Do you, Julian Alexander Thorne, take Serena Marie Mitchell to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, for as long as you both shall live? I do. And do you, Serena Marie Mitchell, take Julian Alexander Thorne to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, for as long as you both shall live? Serena looked at the man who had believed in her when she had nothing, who had fought for her when everyone else assumed she was guilty, who had helped her build a life from the ashes of everything that had been destroyed. I do. They exchanged rings, simple bands of platinum that would mean everything and nothing at the same time. Hope clapped enthusiastically, not entirely sure what was happening, but certain that it was something worth celebrating. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Julian kissed her, and the guests applauded, and Hope ran over to hug both of them at once. In the front row, Serena's mother whispered to her husband through her tears. She got her happy ending. Serena's father shook his head, smiling. She built her happy ending. There is a difference. 5 years after the divorce, morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse apartment, turning everything it touched to gold. Central Park stretched out below like a private garden, the trees just beginning to show their autumn colors. The city spread in every direction, 20 million people starting their days, completely unaware of the family having breakfast 65 stories above their heads. The apartment was filled with the comfortable chaos of a home that was actually lived in. Art on the walls, some worth millions, some finger-painted by a 5-year-old. Books everywhere, stacked on shelves and tables in the arm of the couch where someone had been reading last night. Toys scattered across the living room, evidence of imagination at work. Serena stood in the kitchen, making pancakes on a griddle that cost more than her first car. She was 37 years old, more beautiful than she had been at 32, the stress lines around her eyes replaced by laugh lines. On the marble counter beside her sat a letter from the Nobel Committee. Her enzyme had been nominated for the prize in chemistry. It had now been administered to over 4 million people worldwide, removing billions of microplastic particles from human bloodstreams. The clinical trials had shown a 40% reduction in inflammation-related diseases among treated populations. Medical journals were calling it the most significant pharmaceutical breakthrough in a generation. Serena read the letter every morning, not because she needed the validation, but because it reminded her how far she had come. "Mommy, Daddy said I can have chocolate chips." Hope burst into the kitchen like a small tornado, wearing a princess dress over her pajamas. She was 5 years old now, with her mother's dark hair and dark eyes and a personality that suggested she would either change the world or burn it down, possibly both. "Did Daddy say that?" Serena asked. "Or did you tell Daddy to say that?" Julian appeared in the doorway, holding a coffee mug and looking amused. He was wearing weekend clothes, a rare sight for a man who had spent most of his life in bespoke suits. "I have been manipulated by a 5-year-old, he admitted. "I am not proud of it." He kissed Serena good morning, then scooped Hope onto his hip. In my defense, she made a very compelling argument. It involved tears, and the word please repeated approximately 17 times. Serena pretended to consider. "Fine. Chocolate chips." "Yay!" Hope threw her arms around her father's neck. Julian carried her to the breakfast table, making a show of struggling under her weight even though she was barely 40 pounds. "You are getting too big to carry," he announced. "No, I am not." Hope giggled. "Carry me forever. Forever is a long time." "I know." She put her small hands on either side of his face. "That is why it is called forever." The television played softly in the corner, tuned to a morning news program. Serena mostly ignored it, focused on the pancakes, but a familiar face on the screen caught her attention. She reached for the remote and turned up the volume. In financial news, convicted fraudster Mark Sterling has filed for personal bankruptcy for the 4th time since his release from prison. Sterling, once a prominent marketing executive, has been unable to find employment due to his criminal record and the ongoing civil judgments against him. The footage showed Mark being interviewed outside a rundown apartment complex in Newark, New Jersey. He looked nothing like the man who had once worn bespoke suits and checked his Rolex every 5 minutes. His hair was gray and thinning. His face was haggard, lined with the accumulated stress of consequences he had never expected to face. "I am trying to rebuild my life," Mark said into the camera. "I made mistakes. I paid for them. All I want now is a chance to start over." The interviewer asked about his ex-wife, about the biological daughter he had never met. Mark's face twisted with something that might have been regret or self-pity or the remnants of bitterness that he had never quite managed to release. "Serena will not let me see my daughter. She has poisoned hope against me. All I want is a chance to have a relationship with my child. I am her father. I have rights." The segment ended. Serena picked up the remote and changed the channel to a cartoon. Julian watched her carefully. "Do you want to talk about it?" Serena shook her head. "There is nothing to talk about. He is not part of my life anymore. He is not even a memory. He is just noise." She set a plate of chocolate chip pancakes in front of Hope, who attacked them with enthusiasm. "He tried to contact me again last month," Serena continued, sitting down at the table, "through his lawyer. He wants visitation rights with Hope. He claims he has changed. That prison reformed him, that he deserves a chance to be a father." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that Hope already has a father. One who was there for her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. One who reads her bedtime stories and attends her dance recitals and knows that her favorite color changes every week, but is currently purple. She looked at Julian with a soft smile. I told him that fatherhood is not about biology. It is about showing up. And he made his choice a long time ago. Julian reached across the table and took her hand. What do you want Hope to know about him? When she is older? Serena considered the question. I want her to know the truth, not to protect her from it or shelter her from the reality of what happened. But I also do not want her to define herself by his failures. He is not her villain. He is just a man who made terrible choices and faced the consequences. She looked at her daughter, who was carefully arranging chocolate chips into a smiley face on her remaining pancake. I want her to know that she is more than where she came from, that she gets to choose who she becomes, that the people who try to define her by their own limitations are the people she should ignore. Hope looked up from her pancake art. Mommy, what are you talking about? Serena smiled. Nothing important, baby girl. Just grown-up stuff. Hope nodded seriously. Grown-up stuff is boring. It really is, Julian agreed. That is why we have chocolate chips. After breakfast, Serena stood by the window, looking out at the city that had been the setting for both her destruction and her resurrection. Somewhere out there was the Brooklyn apartment where Mark had served her divorce papers. Somewhere was the courthouse where she had watched her accusers be convicted. Somewhere was the holding cell where she had cried alone, certain that everything was lost. She did not think about any of those places anymore. She did not think about Mark, working a night security job, filing for bankruptcy, trying to convince the world that he was the real victim. She did not think about Jessica, who had been released after 5 years and had moved back to her hometown in Ohio. According to social media, she worked at a grocery store now and did not use her real name. She did not think about Margaret, who had died alone in the prison infirmary 2 years into her sentence. A stroke, the doctor said. Her obituary had been 3 sentences long, and her funeral had been attended by 4 people. The past was the past. It had shaped her, but it did not define her. Julian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? Serena leaned back against him. I was thinking about something my father said at our wedding, that I built my happy ending instead of just getting one. Julian kissed the top of her head. He was right. He was. Serena smiled. Everything I have, everything I am, I built it myself, from nothing, from the ashes of everything that tried to destroy me. She turned in his arms to face him. And I am not done building. From the other room, Hope's voice rang out. Mommy, Daddy, come see what I made. They walked together into the living room where their daughter had constructed an elaborate tower from building blocks. It was crooked and precarious and absolutely beautiful. It is a skyscraper, Hope announced proudly, like the ones outside. It goes all the way up to the sky. Serena knelt down beside her. It is perfect, baby girl. When I grow up, Hope said with absolute certainty, I am going to build real ones, and I am going to make them so tall they touch the clouds. Serena pulled her daughter into a hug. You can do anything you want, be anything you want, build anything you want. She looked at Julian over Hope's head. That is what we do in this family. We build things. 10 years later, the auditorium at Columbia University was filled to a capacity. Over 3,000 seats, every single one occupied. Standing room only along the walls and in the back. Overflow crowds watching on screens in adjacent lecture halls. The occasion was the inauguration of the Mitchell Thorne Center for Biomedical Innovation, a state-of-the-art research facility that would house the next generation of scientists working to solve the problems that Serena had once tackled in a basement laboratory. The building had been funded jointly by Chimera Global and the Mitchell Family Foundation, a nonprofit that Serena had established specifically to support researchers who, like her younger self, had brilliant ideas but limited resources. It was the culmination of years of work, a physical monument to everything she believed in. But for Serena, the most important part of the day was not the speeches or the ribbon cutting or the photographs with dignitaries. It was the girl sitting in the front row. Hope Mitchell Thorne was 15 years old now. She had her mother's dark hair and dark eyes and formidable intelligence. She was already taking advanced courses in biology and chemistry, already talking about the research she wanted to do, already planning the problems she wanted to solve. She was everything Serena had once dreamed of being when she was young. And she was more, Because Hope had never learned to make herself small. She had never learned to hide her light. She had never learned to believe that her worth depended on someone else's validation. She had been raised to shine. Serena stepped to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. Professors she had studied with, researchers she had collaborated with, students who reminded her of herself at their age. Her parents, older now, but still crying at her achievements. Julian still looking at her with the same admiration he had shown on their wedding day. 20 years ago, she began, I was a graduate student with no money, no connections, and no reason to believe that my dreams would ever come true. I was married to a man who told me every day that my work was worthless. I was told by everyone around me that I should give up, get a real job, stop dreaming. She paused. I did not listen. The audience was silent, hanging on her words. I built a company in secret while everyone thought I was failing. I developed technology that has now helped millions of people around the world. I did it with no funding, no support, and no encouragement from anyone except my own stubborn refusal to accept that I was not good enough. Her eyes found hope in the front row. I am not telling you this to brag. I am telling you this because I know that many of you are sitting where I once sat, doubting yourselves, wondering if your ideas are good enough, wondering if you are good enough, listening to the voices that tell you to give up, play it safe, accept your limitations. Her voice strengthened. Do not listen to those voices. She gestured to the building behind her. This center exists because I refused to believe the people who told me I was nothing. It exists because I trusted my own vision when no one else could see it. It exists because I learned that the opinions of small people should never determine the size of your dreams. She looked around the auditorium. Some of you will change the world. Some of you will cure diseases that have plagued humanity for centuries. Some of you will solve problems that we do not even know we have yet. Her voice softened. And some of you will face obstacles that seem insurmountable. You will be doubted. You will be discouraged. You will be told that what you are trying to do is impossible. She smiled. Do it anyway. The applause started slowly and built to a thunderous crescendo. 3,000 people on their feet, celebrating not just a building but an idea. The idea that dreams were worth pursuing, that obstacles were meant to be overcome, that the voices of doubt should never have the final word. After the ceremony, after the handshakes and photographs and congratulations, Serena found Hope waiting for her in a quiet corner of the new building. That was a good speech, Hope said. Thank you. Serena smoothed her daughter's hair. I meant every word of it. I know. Hope was quiet for a moment. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever think about him, the biological father? Serena considered the question carefully. Not often. Sometimes when I see something in the news, or when you ask about him. But he does not occupy space in my thoughts the way he once did. Are you angry at him? Serena sat down on one of the new benches that lined the building's central corridor. Hope sat beside her. I was angry for a long time, Serena admitted. Angry at what he did to me. Angry at what he tried to take from me. Angry at the years I wasted trying to be what he wanted instead of who I was. She took Hope's hand. But anger is exhausting. It takes up space that could be used for better things. And eventually I realized that being angry at him was just another way of giving him power over me. So what do you feel now? Serena thought about it. Nothing, mostly. He is a stranger, someone I knew in another life. Sometimes I feel sad for him, I suppose. He had a chance to be part of something wonderful. He had a chance to know you, to watch you grow, to be proud of who you are becoming. And he threw it away because he could not see past his own ego. She squeezed Hope's hand. But his choices are not your burden. You do not owe him anything. Not your time, not your attention, not your forgiveness, unless you want to give it. He made his decisions. You get to make yours. Hope nodded slowly. I do not want to meet him, she said. Maybe someday I will change my mind. But right now I have a father, a real one who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my science projects and stayed up with me when I was sick. She looked at Serena. Biology does not make a family. Love does. Serena felt tears pricking at her eyes. When did you get so wise? I had good teachers. Hope smiled. Also, I read a lot. Books are very informative. Serena laughed and pulled her daughter into a hug. I am so proud of you. I hope you know that. I know. Hope hugged her back. I am pretty proud of me, too. They sat together in the quiet building, mother and daughter surrounded by the physical manifestation of dreams that had once seemed impossible. Outside the windows, the campus spread in every direction. Students walking to classes, researchers heading to laboratories, the future taking shape in 1,000 small ways. Serena thought about the journey that had brought her here, the basement laboratories, the sleepless nights, the husband who had called her worthless, the morning she had stood in a Brooklyn bathroom and whispered to herself that everything was about to change. She had been right, though not in the way she had expected. Everything had changed. She had lost her marriage, her home, her reputation, her freedom. She had faced accusations and arrests and trials. She had watched people she had trusted try to destroy her, and she had survived. More than survived. She had thrived. She had built an empire from nothing. She had changed the lives of millions of people. She had raised a daughter who would change millions more. Mom, Hope's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Yes, thank you. For everything. For not giving up. For not letting them win. For being strong enough to build all of this. She gestured around at the building. But mostly for being my mom. Serena held her daughter closer. Thank you for being worth fighting for. They sat together in the golden afternoon light, two women at different stages of the same journey, connected by blood and choice in the unbreakable bond of a love that had been built, not given. Outside, the world kept spinning. Lives began and ended. Dreams were born and abandoned. People made choices that would shape their futures in ways they could not imagine. Serena did not think about any of it. She was too busy being exactly where she wanted to be, with the people who mattered, living the life she had built, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time, forever.